Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Dollar Menu Podcast. I'm your host, Brian. Today, we're joined by Mr. Jeremy Korst, who is a seasoned executive and recognized industry leader in marketing and commercial strategies. And in the past, he had led the fastest worldwide adoption of the new Windows system. And he had also expanded the customer and revenue base in broadband and wholesale as T-Mobile vice president. And today, he's a pioneer in the AI field of consulting and marketing as partner and founder at companies like GBK Collective and Mindspan AI, where he aims to improve strategic AI adoption by businesses. So, Mr. Kortz, before we move on to the questions, is there anything else you would like to introduce more about yourself?
No, that's great. Thanks for having me, Brian. You can call me Jeremy.
Okay.
And interested to be here. I guess one of the things to maybe add is that I spend actually a decent amount of time in academia as well. So I'm on the board of the Wharton School. I co-founded what is now we believe, longest running study on enterprise AI adoption. And so do a lot of work around classroom lectures at business schools across the country and working with businesses, like you said, on adopting new technology.
Yeah, so I guess the first part of the interview will be more focused on how to really just cultivate that mindset when running an organization. So you've had multiple experiences, as you said, of leading massive like business organizations, including Microsoft and all of that. So when you're making a management decision or deciding to like handle like a business, what metrics or signs do you usually look for when you're trying to evaluate if a business has attained like the operational maturity to scale effectively?
Well, yeah, I think there's a combination of financial metrics and management you can look at, whether that's benchmark analysis compared to peers or target setting. I think as a leader too, there's also some psychological or maybe even visceral evaluations you do. I mean, to me, large organizations, people talk about economies of scale, but there's also diseconomies of scale. The larger an organization gets, the harder it is to have a holistic, refined, intentional strategy and making sure the entire team and the entire organization is marching to that strategy effectively. And so I've been involved now in companies as a board member and advisor all the way down to early stage pre-funding, and like you said, all the way up to Microsoft, leading Microsoft's Windows business. It's over, like I said, over $20 billion. And so I got to see a lot of this, and at each of those phases, I'd say there's some similarities around how is a leader organizing and orchestrating and communicating the growing team to empower them, make sure they have the resources to be effective, and that everybody's marching to the same vision and strategy. And Microsoft are just, a really large example of that. I led global business, 160 plus subsidiaries, thousands of people many of whom didn't report to me directly, but were looking to me and my team for guidance and strategy. And so I'd say, like, again, like, while there's a lot written around the financial metrics of looking at efficiencies and effectiveness and revenue growth and margin expansion, as a leader, like, really that level of comfort and understanding is, does my team have the information and resources that they need to be effective? To me, I think is even more important. And I know throughout my career arc, there was times where I felt uncomfortable because I felt like I wasn't doing a good enough job to bring clarity, to bring the team together, to get them what they need to overcome obstacles. And then there were times where I felt like completely energized because I could see the entire machine moving and being effective around that. So I guess that's how I'd answer that question.
Okay, so I guess it's more focused in terms of like the communication side between like top level management with like the entire organization in order for not only just the entire organization to move effectively, but also to allow you sort of grasp whether like the growth potential of like the entire organization based on how it's working, but beyond just like pure financial metrics on paper, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like let's think about the communication and this communication of the strategy. Because ultimately in any organization, you want everybody on that team and that organization feeling empowered to do their job for the company, for the brand, and for the customer. And if they're having to waste any time throughout their day thinking about, well, should I do A or should I do B? Because it's not clear to them what the priorities are, who the target customer is, what we're trying to achieve, then that's entirely wasted energy and that's wasted effort and waste resources in the organization. So for me, from a leadership perspective, it's really imperative to make sure that that's clear, that we have those conversations. It's not just a top-down edict, but the entire organization understands those. What are we measuring? What are we trying to achieve? How are we trying to achieve it? So when that person comes into work or at home, whenever they're engaging, they don't have to be, they don't have that uncertainty. They can just do the good work that they want to do for the company and the team.
Yeah, that
gets harder the bigger organization you get. And by the way, it gets even harder when we have AI. When we have AI bots. So we can talk about that a little bit if you want, but I think that challenge is going to be even more profound in the coming months and years.
Yeah, I think you mentioned something about like these economies of scale, like when considering, like usually when you consider scaling, you usually, like me personally, I think more towards the startup side and like early stage founders, but you also mentioned diseconomies of scale, which is also like a real challenge that is faced by like a larger organization. You mentioned like Microsoft. How do you think like how do you sort of sense the like sort of this entire possibility of situation being more towards the side of these economies of scale, and how do you sort of like try to mitigate it from like it through like whether communications or like sort of like providing more strategic clarity towards like your whether your like employees or something like that?
Yeah, I think that. So I think historically, like I was mentioning, is that some of these large organizations suffer from diseconomies of scale. What I mean by that, it's the bureaucratic environment, the time it takes to make a decision, the time it takes, you hear people say, to turn the ship. And so that's what it's very related to what we talked about just a minute ago, is that the more that leadership can clarify direction and to empower people to act more quickly, helps overcome some of those diseconomies. Now, in the last, throughout most of my career, because of scale, because of size, some of those larger companies have been able to overcome some of the challenges of the diseconomies of scale through sheer mass and infrastructure. They've been able to continue to sustain. I do think that we're entering a time, then of course with early stage startups and growth size companies that I've been involved with and am involved with, they have the benefit of acting relatively quickly, being able to quickly come to a decision, be able to be more nimble and experiment, but they've lacked the resources in many cases to truly compete head to head with some of these larger companies. I think that we are entering a time with generative AI and some of the technologies that we have that is going to change, because now smaller organizations will still have the benefit of being able to act quickly, be nimble, experiment, be closer to their customers, frankly. But now, because of generative AI, I think they've got some of the resources. Hey, I've seen, some of the things like prototypes in my days back in Windows or T-Mobile could take 6 to 9 months to be developed. I can do that now on my desktop in a matter of hours with vibe coding. And so I think this dimension is changing dramatically. And I'm pretty excited about it because I think it's going to allow entrepreneurs and leaders to be even more effective in like driving this type of change and being competitive.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And before going to more of like the stuff and discussions on AI, I would like to first, I guess, focus more also on your role as previously more focused on marketing. Like, One of the things that I'm also curious about is since you have experiences both as a chief marketing officer and chief commercial officers, which both of them appear similar in terms of growing a business organically. And so for students aspiring to hold like one of these positions in the future, um, what are some core differences you found between being a marketing leader versus more of like a commercial leader when you served both of these roles?
Yeah, a great question. And first of all, I take the perspective of what I call big M marketing, strategic marketing. So that means in marketing, more like you would see often in consumer packaged goods or in consumer organizations, where marketing is the primary driver of growth and success for the organization. It's product, place, price, and promotion. And so in a lot of technology and new age organizations, marketing has become what some would call small M marketing, focusing more really on promotion. So on the outbound customer acquisition and advertising. And I think it's my perspective, and I feel really strongly about this, is that that's only a part of the role of marketing. And the roles that I've had, I've been lucky enough to where marketing is a much more strategic, accountable organization that informs product strategy, is responsible for business model and pricing, is accountable for overall market success. So that's, I think, important when I think about marketing that way. But I also want to acknowledge that lots of companies don't think about marketing that way. They think about it as being primarily outbound demand generation, customer retention, etc. But because of my perspective and the roles I've been able to have, there's not as much of distinction between marketing and commercial because it's been more encompassing. But that being said, again, most organizations think about this a little bit differently. And so on the commercial side, where I was responsible for sales directly, I mean, that is a bit different. You are focused on making a number, delivering sales back to the organization. You need to work with marketing to be able to hopefully have a consistent strategy and voice about what we're telling people in the marketing across the website and in advertising and promotion, all the way to when one of my sales reps is talking to a customer and making sure that we have a consistent message and point of view. And that's tough. I just got to say that's tough. It's been historically tough. I think it's continually tough to keep that type of consistency because the orgs just tend to be a bit different and they're wired for different time horizons. But it's really important to try to keep that consistent approach, I think, because otherwise we have the opportunity or the impact of really confusing our customers. And there's quite a bit of research that shows that brands that don't do this well and who confuse customers often lose a bunch of market opportunity because customers just turn off. If they can't understand what you're really for, what really differentiates you, why they should choose you versus somebody else, it's easier just to go talk and listen to somebody who actually can deliver that message.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So essentially, I guess if like under your interpretation of like marketing, that sort of also sort of encompasses like some of the roles of like being a commercial leader, but then like in a lot of businesses in today's world, they tend to separate it more in terms of like commercial being more related to like direct sales and stuff like that, and then marketing is more focused on the promotion side. So
yeah. In fact, by the way,
yeah.
Brian, one of the things I say, like when we get together in big company meetings, and some people may have experienced this with other leaders, is I'd say like, hey, raise your hand if you're in sales. People raise their hands. Raise your hands if you're in marketing. Other people raise their hands. I was like, wrong. Everybody in here is in sales and marketing in some fashion, even the product team. Because if you're not thinking about that customer who needs to make a decision to choose you versus someone else, then you're not going to create the right product. You're not going to create the right experience. You're not going to deliver the right messaging. You're not going to be able to translate that into a sale if the whole organization isn't thinking consistently. Yes, everybody's got their own role in that machine that they've got to fulfill, that role. But really thinking holistically about that marketing, sales, and go to market is really important across the entire organization.
Yeah, and at the same time, I also think that it allows like both, like I guess the marketing and sales division to like sort of sync more effectively with with each other. So then like their entire like promotion strategy can be more aligned to how they like intended their sales to be.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, by the way, I had a really good leader when I got out of business school and first started. It was first started in product marketing. Abby Ingley, who's still an executive running around doing all kinds of great things. But in our team in marketing, when we came up with a new either a product concept or a new marketing plan, we had to go get a sales executive to sponsor it.
Yeah.
And what that did is that required us to do exactly that. Is like, let's not just go throw a bunch of things over the wall at sales. That required us to go talk to that sales leader, get their sponsorship, get their feedback around the way we have to do it as a gate and a decision before we could do it. And I tell you, that was early in my career, and that really, really landed with me to have that type of alignment so that we're not wasting each other's time and confusing customers.
And I guess I'll pivot more in terms of the promotion side of the role of your role. So, say if we split our like decisions, like our sort of purpose for promotion into first one is attracting new customers, and the other one is sort of reducing churn, sort of retaining more of these customers. So, what are some conditions or scenarios do you think, like under which a business should decide to favor heavily over one promotion style like purpose to attract more customer and or to pivot more towards like reducing like churn?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and there's a lot. We have a whole several hour podcast on this topic alone because I really, really believe in the importance of big marketing strategy of what's segmentation, targeting, and positioning. Not every customer is the right customer for a product or for a brand. And it needs to be intentional about what products we're building, for who, and why should they choose us. If we get that wrong, what we're going to do is we're going to end up acquiring a bunch of the wrong customers, and that's going to cost us a lot of money and a lot of pain. And by the way, I experienced this directly, earlier in my career. I was at T-Mobile. We were launching the company's first mobile broadband product and services, and we were doing great, or so I thought. So we were on this trajectory. We had this like growth trajectory of new customers that was just impressive. About like a couple quarters in, I got a call on a Sunday afternoon from our CEO, who told me that he had looked at our numbers and noticed that our churn rate was 10%. And by the way, in the mobile industry, that's a monthly number. So what that meant was that in the course of a year, we were losing over 100% of the customers that we'd acquired in the given period. And so we had this leaky bucket. We were buying and paying for a bunch of new customers. By definition, none of them were going to be around for more than a year to be able to pay that back. Okay. And so he said, Jeremy, you've got a couple months to get this fixed. Okay, boss. So we had to dig in, and I learned a lot about this. And so what we learned is that our salespeople, our channel partners, our sellers, were essentially mispositioning this product. They were positioning a mobile broadband solution, which was really meant for like tablets and mobile PCs on the go. They were positioning it at the time as a home broadband replacement, which our technology did not do a good job of. And customers were telling us because they were firing us about that. And so this is I've actually written about this. You can go out a little bit about this story in this, but this is what we called, the leaky bucket. And it's really, to me, super important to make sure that we're targeting and acquiring the right customers for the right reasons, because that is typically so much more valuable to the organization and less costly over time than having the experience I did and many companies have, where they're acquiring as many customers as they can, but then they're losing them out the back door and they're losing a bunch of money on that acquisition. So that's my point of view.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So would you say in some ways though, like the scale of the organization itself plays in a role on deciding like sort of the promotion strategy on whether they should favor more on attracting customer or reducing churn? Because like I think a lot of people in terms of their mindset is more focused on like on the early stage of the startup, they should focus more on tracking the customer necessary, while it's only towards the later stages where like the organization has accumulated scale, where they have to start worrying about reducing churn. Do you think this is a wrong mindset, and then like reducing churn should be like a top priority starting when you're like starting a startup like in the early stage?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is very costly to all organizations. And sometimes larger organizations with bigger customer bases, this cost gets hidden more easily. But it's still a major cost that, if corrected, could save dollars. In the early stages of a company, it is also very, very painful. In the early stages of a company, when you only have so many marketing dollars, so many opportunities to have somebody listen to you and consider you, only so many opportunities for a seller to talk to somebody. If you're not trying to talk to the right customers for the right reason, you're just wasting time and costing yourself very limited money. Now, I do know, I've been involved in a lot of startups, that it's hard to get this perfect. There is a part about, hey, we need to go out and experiment and learn and do product market fit. But still, I think the mindset of thinking like, hey, let's just recognize that not every customer is the right customer. And how are we going to get smarter about that over time such that we build the right product and the right features and the right go-to-market and the right promotion, so that over time we get even better at looking at the right customers. And by the way, if you and others want to go look at some of the academic literature about this, as well as some of the managerial literature, this whole area of customer lifetime value is really what we're talking about. And from the Wharton School, Peter Fader has written a couple books on this, a ton of great content out that allows you to analytically look at cohort by cohort analysis to really understand how good of a job you're doing at actually what we're talking about. More recently, some of the financial literature refers to this as unit economics. So if you hear about unit economics or customer lifetime value, it's really this conversation we're having around promotion, targeting, acquisition, and churn, but from a much more analytical basis.
So you did mention about like sort of the concept that we must have, like how we should focus more of, I guess, the resources on what type of customer we should have, and then not like every single customer is the right fit for our product. So since both of your at GBK Collective, your approach favors both, like I guess from what I saw, quantitative and qualitative analysis. So do you think like in the modern world, in terms of like finding the right customer or like actually launching successful modern marketing campaign, do you think um are they more successful as a result of better like psychological insights into the customer's behavior and sort of know what exactly sort of behavior they want to elicit from their target customer? Or do you think it's more focused on how these businesses have like better, I guess, mathematical optimization of their marketing cost and resources they devoted?
Yeah, so I think there's a bit of both. Here's what I'd say, like, first of all, I step back and I think about segmentation, targeting, and positioning. That's being choiceful about which customers and why our company is going to go after. That is an important decision, not only marketing and sales, but it's critical for product. If the
Yeah.
product team doesn't know which how they're spending their limited resources to develop new features and experiences for which customers, we end up with these Frankenstein products, right? That really aren't good for anybody. They're optimized for a bunch of different customers, but when you put it together, it's not good. So it's important that the entire organization share this point of view to me on who the customer is. And to your point, a key part of that understanding is some of the more psychographic and behavioral information. When we start looking at the way markets behave and customers behave, it's often not on observable demographic bases. I'm sure we can all come up with all kinds of examples of older people that have certain traits that make them seem younger and buy things as if they're younger, and vice versa. This is the way humans tend to behave. And so that's why it's important, I think, to collect as much information as practical about the market, about customers, about their unmet needs, about what they're looking for and how they make decisions against this, about your potential product or service versus competitors, including doing nothing, which is often the choice they make, so that we can really try to put ourselves in their shoes, get inside their mind, so that we can build the product most effectively. And then in marketing, we can communicate the most effectively to help them make the decision to choose us. Now, what's happened in some modern marketing is there's been this fallacy of cost per click and these metrics that seem to be optimal in terms of how am I going to get the most return on my investment in a given channel. When I'm talking to a CEO or a CMO or a CCO and they start telling me some of those performance metrics, I always try to eke out of that is like, are you evaluating all customers, your target customers? What's the cost per click or the cost per action for your target customer? And very often they can't answer that because they're looking at the whole picture. And it's like, well, if you don't have an idea of how much you're paying for good customers versus bad customer actions, we better get to that pretty quickly, because we're probably either overspending on marketing because it's not targeted to the way it should be, or it could be. This is it's not science, so we're not gonna be able to get it exact, but at least I bet you we can get it better. And they're probably going to be bringing on customers that aren't really well suited for what we're delivering, like we talked about earlier. So chances are their churn rate's going to be higher. And so that type of mentality, I think, is super important. And qualitative and quantitative research are important ways to be able to do that. And by the way, in modern technology with AI, it's becoming even more accessible to be able to do this at a lower cost and quicker timeline, so that hopefully more companies can embrace that type of real market and customer feedback.
Yeah, you mentioned about how, I guess, artificial intelligence itself can make this entire, I guess, market research, whether it's quantitative or qualitative, easier, since it's basically doing with more efficiency. But at the same time, since it lowered the entry barriers for digital marketing through these costs. So
Yeah.
do you think there might be some sort of, I guess, increase, say if you're a more well-known, I guess, organization, and there might be some AI that was being deployed to increase market noises, whether it's through misinformation campaigns. So do you think this makes branding strategies harder, or do you think it sort of leaves these more well-trusted and respected brands as sort of the only asset that customers can rely on?
I think, it's to be seen. As, by the way, let's also put into this conversation what's going to happen as we as consumers leverage AI to help us make decisions. So how is AI interpreting those messages and helping us interpret? That's a whole new dimension too. But in general, here's what I think, this is some generalities here, is that I think that the cost of content creation and dissemination has dramatically reduced with AI. And so there's a lot more AI slop out there and a lot of confusing messages. And so I think that there becomes an even greater opportunity to do what we were talking about earlier, which is how can I have a more focused, differentiated, meaningful message in the market? So that I'm not saying a bunch of different things to a bunch of different people just because it's low cost and I can easily do that with AI now. How can I really make sure that when somebody actually will listen to me, that I am specific, resonant, differentiated, and meaningful so that they're like, wait a minute. No, this is a company and a product or a service that is for me. Now, and I do think you're right in that some of the established known brands, may have some benefit in this space, because if I'm confused by a bunch of AI slop and low quality, confusing messages from competitors, I'm, like I said earlier in the conversation, I am most likely going to go choose somebody that I know and I can trust. But that being said, I really, really do believe that there's now increasing opportunity for smaller competitors to really be focused and meaningful, to be able to go after their niche or smaller group of segment of customers and be effective with them.
Yeah, so I guess to look at AI in both ways, it's more of like one part of it, if used like sort of incorrectly, it's going to just simply make the consumer confused on what you're trying to deliver. But at the same time, if like we use AI to focus, like deliver a very, very meaningful message to the niche market, they might resonate a lot more than like the generic product from those larger organizations, which allows like these smaller, I guess, organizations to compete more effectively in those like sort of niche markets against the large organizations.
Yeah, I think that's right. And so then as leaders, whether you're in a large organization or a smaller organization, I think getting back to what we were talking about before, is having that cohesive strategy across the organization is important. Because if marketing goes and adopts some AI tools that help them, optimize content and create new content marketing campaigns, and then sales goes out and gets their own different AI solution that is locally optimal for their part of the funnel or their part of the journey rather, we have the opportunity perhaps for them not working together. So as we get these resources that allow us to do more, to scale, because the technology reduces the barrier, increases opportunity, that need for coordination to me becomes even more important. Or we're going to confuse our potential customers. They're going to turn their ears off. And by the way, in the industry, what you hear now is this whole thing about context engineering, which is really about not entirely, one aspect of what we're talking about is like, how do we ensure that across our entire go-to-market, we have the context so that both the humans and the AI can cohesively deliver the strategy, and not do things on a locally optimal basis that doesn't make sense when we add it all up.
Yeah, so I think this is what you sort of, I guess, phrase it as strategic clarity when like building Mindspan AI Lab. So I think you did mention that it really isn't the lack of tools when it comes to like integrating AI into like a given organization, but rather it's lacking this sort of clarity of a mindset on how they want to target these AI for, and then for what purpose, and to target which specific customers. So in your opinion, what are some ways for early stage founders or someone who's contemplating about like having a startup to develop such sort of clarity early on in their startup to like sort of effectively leverage AI for their future growth?
Yeah, I just think that, I think you said it well, really, is that, is even more important today, I think, than it was just months ago, to have a clear strategy. Why should our company exist? Who is it serving? How are we doing things different than alternatives, including doing nothing? What is our business model? Those basic, understanding that strategy, also understanding we're a small company, it's going to evolve. We're going to learn, it's going to change. But as we do so, we should make sure that we're doing so intentionally, that we're learning intentionally, that we're evolving intentionally. Then as we have that, that's evolving strategy intentionally written down and understood by our team of both humans and our team of AI, that becomes just super important. And by the way, I need to go in that direction too. It's like, what am I trying to achieve, for whom, why, and when? That strategy, because then I can apply AI and other advanced technologies to it, versus the other way around. When I talk to founders or even CEOs, and the conversation starts with a tool or a solution, you're like, oh, AI can do X, Y, Z. I'm like, well, wait a minute. Let's step back. Sure, I bet AI can do that. But should we use AI to do that? You can have two different companies, even two different startups are going to have different answers to that question, because the way that they want to build product, the way they want to deliver experiences, the way they want to acquire customers could be reasonably and strategically using AI and other technologies in very different ways. And so that's the intentionality, I think, that's important for leaders to think about, is not what the technology can do, but what should it do based on what I am trying to achieve and what my aspirations are.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I guess the final question is that, given your past experiences as like a seasoned executive, what is sort of one unspoken rule or some of the things you found out about the corporate C-suite that you wish you knew when you were just starting your career?
Yeah, I think appreciate the question. I definitely felt this and learned this as I entered the C-suite. And I have definitely, my friends and colleagues, as we talk about that transition, this always comes up, which is one of the key things is when you join the leadership team of a company, whether it's a C-suite or whatever executive team, you're all of a sudden changing from like a smart, capable, functional leader to somebody who's a leader of the company. So you got to think, it's sometimes, I remember earlier in my career is where, I'm worried about my budget and my team, and are we going to be able to get done what we need to do as my function? Whereas as you grow in leadership and get to that team, it's like, I've got to be thinking about all of my colleagues too, because my team's not going to be successful if the rest of the teams can't be successful, because we've got to work together. And so when we think about prioritization and strategy and resource allocation and collaboration, as you join that team, it's looking left and right. You're a member of that team. You're not just the leader of your function. And that may be obvious to a lot of people, but I'll tell you, when you get to that level, that is a big change in mentality. And some people can't make it successfully and end up failing. And then some people thrive at it. And I think those are the ones that go on to do great things and become amazing leaders.
Yeah, so I guess the main strategic difference between, I guess, someone being like a leader in terms of like a small division versus like a corporate executive leader is more like when you are like sort of, I guess, on a smaller division level, you're more focusing about specialization and sort of delivering the best performance of your team. But at a like higher level, it's more about balancing between all the different teams and resources that like might not necessarily be specialization, but sort of optimizing all of these teams to work together. So do you think there are some skills or like, I guess, some of the capabilities we should develop as young, like starting young, as young as possible, to sort of know how to like effectively balance all of these different teams in order to prepare us for like a potential role on like the leadership of a company, like in our later lives?
Yeah, great question. And I hear, some really smart people giving folks advice around this T-shaped career.
Yeah.
Is that, as we develop career, as you develop your career, it's good. It has been good, and I think it will be good even in the AI area to have deep expertise in a given area, to really, or a couple areas, but really make sure like, hey, I don't want to be just a generalist. I want to have some deep expertise in a given function or a given domain or a given area. At the same time, as you orchestrate your career, as you move into different roles, is really making sure you've got broad enough aperture to see across the business as much as possible. And so that may be taking a lateral move into another function as part, earlier in your career. That may be asking your leader or manager to be able to put you on special projects that are cross-functional so you can work with people across the business. That may be going into sales for a while. I think that's a great experience for a lot of people. Or maybe it's moving to a different geography. Whatever it is, those things that give you wider aperture earlier in your career so you can add to your expertise. But then when you get into later stage career, into leadership, you've got at least some context of what other functions within the organization are doing, how they're doing it, what their objectives are, etc. That just sets you up I think, to be much greater opportunity for success, to be part of that true leadership team that is looking out across the company.
Yeah. So in that aspect, do you think artificial intelligence could sort of allow us to, I guess, acquire these sort of learning across different disciplines more effectively? Since like before, artificial intelligence, we might spend a lot more time on researching it, and a lot of, I guess, our apertures might be more focused on, for example, sales, finance, and stuff like in most of the fields in terms of a sub-discipline. But would you think that it's meaningful? Since I think I saw a lot of different, whether it's students or like people in their early careers, just trying to like doing more in terms of like whether it's like double majoring to have like in completely different fields, like for example, CS with econ or something like that. Do you think AI is like making it easier, and do you think it's beneficial to do that sort of, I guess, specializing in both the disciplines of, like, I guess one of more sales approach, and the other is more on like the technical side on tech or engineering?
I definitely think that it is easier today, and it's going to be increasingly easier to learn new things. I mean, Gen AI is amazing at its ability to help you, me, people at any stage of career learn new content. I also believe that I know in my own experience and the vibe coding that I'm doing and developing, I have a whole brand new knowledge around, truly building code and engineering. I'm not an engineer, but wow, the amount that I have learned, that now when I go and talk to my friends who are engineers, that we can actually have a more intelligible conversation because I've been exposed to that. And by the way, I talk to my friends who are in engineering who have been able to learn a ton about marketing and sales because, conversely, they've been using Gen AI to learn that. So I definitely think that AI, in many respects, helps reduce these barriers, provides opportunity for people to learn and experience those things. I would still say super important to have the actual experiences too. Yeah. So, in those cross-functional teams and special projects, or taking on different roles, or like you said, in college and high school, to be able to make sure to mix together perhaps hard science or STEM along with a more expansive whatever is interesting. I think that's still super important to give folks context in addition to the capabilities of AI as they grow in their careers.
Okay. Yeah. That's it for today's episode. Thank you, Jeremy, for joining us today. So I guess we'll see you next time.
All right, Brian. Thanks for having me. Really excited to watch and see what you're up to. You're already off to a great start.